I'm about to ask Chip to just deliver my slides after those conversations, because I realize now I'm the guy that's between you and either the golf course or the airport or lunch. So I'm going to try to keep these. I'm actually going to abridge some of these comments here. But I hope everybody's, first of all, thank you everybody for coming to the annual meeting this year. And we hope you all had a great time. We try to have a full complement of speakers, of events, of networking, and all of that. And I just think that it keeps getting better and better as time goes on. I'd like to thank my two colleagues at the EIMA home front, Lori Joseph and Aggie Sterrett, because all this meeting it would not have happened without them. So I'd like to give them a round of applause. So. All right, so I'm going to talk about a few things here. Okay, and next slide, please. Next slide, because we're going to, okay, this is our leadership of EIMA right now, and they were elected last November, but I just want everybody to know who the board of directors are of the East Industry Members Association. If you could flip it. I'm going to spend a little time here. The comments you heard from the co-chairs of the various working groups. I think one of the things that people notice in all the working group meetings, we had, what, about 40 people in each meeting, something like that? And if you consider we had about 140 people here, that's a tremendous percentage of meeting attendees who attended each working group meeting. And one of the reasons for that, I think, harkens back to the strategic plan that we launched in 2022. When I first came on board, we wanted to have an industry-wide strategic plan where you'd have strategic initiatives on promotion, on advocacy, and on education and workforce development. And what we did there is that we have working groups that are tied to each of those, and that is deliberate and by design. And we also have board members serving as liaisons to each of the working groups. So I call this the whole connect the dots strategy. I've talked about this before, where you have the goals of the industry connect to the goals of the board, connect to the goals of each of the working groups. So it all works together. And I think that one of the things you heard in our conversations earlier today is that you heard all the updates from the co-chairs and Bill Egan about what we're doing. But if you match it up to what you see there, they all match really, really well. And I think the other thing that's kind of neat is that they all work together. They're all interrelated. So, and I think one of the things, being a small association like we are, what we try to do is just make sure that we focus on the things that are going to matter to the industry. Because as an association person, one of the things that we try to do is find that sweet spot where we do things that members either don't or can't do on their own because we do them on behalf of the industry. That's what we're trying to do. And if anything becomes too company specific, well, there's a legal problem with that, obviously. But the other problem is it's a waste of time and money, and we don't want to do that. So that's why we focus on the things that we do. If you go to the next one. Next one, we're gonna skip several. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Go, 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 go. Okay. So these are some of the outcomes from 23 and 24, as you can just see here. I'm not going to read them, but what you heard just now is a follow-on to what you see up here. And again, I call this, what we're going down is a very sequential, deliberate path for our program of work. Because the one thing we don't want to do, we don't want to jump here this year, there next year. We want to kind of have a steady drumbeat approach and just having 1 year build on the next year, build on the next year, and that's what we're doing here. If you go to the next one. Okay, so now I'm going to skip, because one thing that we didn't talk about, we've heard enough about EIMA, what we're doing, and the programs and the members, and you all heard that in the meetings, and I'm not going to rehash that anymore. But I am going to take a couple of things. So this is what we see and what kind of we think about on the EIMA home front, because we look at the economy as a whole, we look at other trade associations and other groups to see what we're doing in the DC area. And Kermit Baker gave a fabulous presentation yesterday on the economy and the economic trends, and it wasn't the most encouraging news, right? You didn't necessarily love it per se, but I think one of the things that was there is that, well, actually, I remember that slide. It just died? Okay. So one of the things that I think that we learned was that last year was the first year, regardless of what's going on, that construction spending was over $2 trillion. Okay? That's a lot of money in the United States, and that includes renovation and all that kind of thing. So, I mean, I think that's one thing that we want to talk about, is just that construction spending spent was a lot. You compare that to 15, 20 years ago, and I think the next slide I had there was for 2005 or 6. And at that point, it was $454 billion. So it has just grown exponentially since then. Now, the other thing that's very different when you look at what's being spent on when, and Kermit touched upon this yesterday, back then during, I call the peak of the boom, you had single-family construction was a huge part of the pie, and it isn't right now at all. It's definitely a much smaller part. There's a lot of pent-up demand. And so I think that that's something to think about. So construction is a big part of it, and we have a very good story to tell with respect to, especially on the commercial side, because we can play the affordability card really well, and we can also play the sustainability card really, really well, which is just great. So, I mean, I think that's just something to think about that we've got going on there. So I think, you know, even though EIFS isn't in the single-family market typically now, we have been at one time, I think it's instructive to talk about single-family for just a second, because it's not one monolithic market. I think everybody knows that. It's a series of markets. The census can break it out by region. And I think especially for people from businesses from other countries, it's interesting to look at the single-family market here, because it's definitely not one and the same. I mean, I think what's interesting, if you look at the South, that's half of all the building construction in single-family in the United States. And what's interesting there, and then you look at the West is number 2, the Midwest is number 3, and the Northeast is frankly a very distant third, okay? Very distant third. If you go to the next slide. And this just kind of breaks it out. And the market share is incredibly different in these regions too. So it's interesting. I think you all know that I came from the Brick Association. I was there for a long time. In the South, brick is king, okay? Everywhere else, it's nominal at best. And what's interesting is for the last several years, and I think I'll mention this because a lot of you do business with stucco. Stucco's been number 1 for 3 or 4 years in a row now, which is very interesting. But I think what's interesting is that there are more stucco homes now built in the South than there are in the West. And that's pretty new. That's only a couple of years old. So I think that's just kind of an interesting thing. And as you can just see, New England, or the Northeast, there's just very little, there's very little new home construction activity going on there. If you go to the next slide. I think another thing that's interesting for what's going on here, and you all know this, our building codes, all these codes, it's not one code. We have an IBC, we have an IRC, we have an IECC, and everybody thinks that when they're passed, everybody just, they just spread around the country. Not like that at all. We have thousands of local building code jurisdictions. They can pretty much do what they want. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that as far as the energy codes are concerned, the dark blue indicates the state is more efficient, and we have several states that don't have an energy code at all. So it's a total mishmash. If you go to the next slide. And it's the same thing for the residential code, but even worse. So I think that's one thing when we're talking about why does EIMA do advocacy, because advocacy in our view includes building codes. This is why we have to do it, okay? And it's I would say it's not uniquely American, but it's particularly the United States, where we have this kind of mishmash of things going on at the state and local level that may or may not be as pronounced in other parts of the world. But that's why we do it. If you go to the next slide, please. Here's another thing that's very interesting. And I came from this world in a prior career. I was an advertising guy in New York City. And advertising is part of the American culture. It's huge, okay? And in the United States and Canada, we spend not just by far more than everybody else in raw numbers, but on a per capita basis. We spend so much more than any other region of the world, it's not even funny. If you go to the next slide, please. But in our industry, in construction and building materials, we spend very, very little, okay? So we spend way less than 1% on advertising. We talk about net sales. We spend way less than 1% of net sales on advertising and promotion, okay, as an industry. These are Census Bureau's figures from 2020, and these just breaks out, total manufacturing, 0.28%. You compare, there are some exceptions, which I'll talk about in a second, but if you talk about snack foods, if you talk about retail, wholesale, they all spend much more than that. But there are some exceptions in our world. If you go to the next slide. If you can. Okay. So that's one issue that's there. Another thing that's interesting, and we're kind of dealing with this right now, I think, in the United States with the Drill Baby Drill initiative going on in Washington, D.C., and again, this is kind of, I would say, uniquely American phenomenon, energy efficiency. It's just not that huge a deal here in the U.S. And this slide kind of says it all right there. How do we know energy efficiency is not as big of a deal here as it is in others? You look at the best-selling vehicle that people buy, okay? It's the Ford F-150. And when I was in Europe last year, seeing some members over there, I showed this slide. And, their cars are small or electric. And I say the best-selling vehicle in the United States, it's not even close, is the Ford F-150. And that raised some eyebrows there. And it's been like that for, 40 years in a row? Something like that? Long time. If you go to the next slide, please. And our political environment, we all know this, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. Our political environment is just, I would call it hurly-burly right now. Living in Washington, D.C., along with Aggie, with Lori, the word Doge, which we didn't even know what it was 6 months ago, we know is now both a noun and a verb, right? We all know people who've been doged, but you look at this, we were all excited in July of last year when we were part of this grant program that you see here, and that's what it was in July of last year. And if you go to the next slide. And now look what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the administrator saying that today is the greatest day of deregulation our nation has ever seen. We are driving a dagger straight into the heart of the climate change religion. So that's what we're dealing. It's a total opposite. If you go to the next slide. And so our grant appears to have been doged. I'm saying appears to have been doged. The reason I say that is that we're listed on the Doge website, if you see on the next slide, or we think we are. You can't really see it, but I put there our amount has been identified as being doged, or terminated, or canceled. But here's the interesting thing. We've never heard a word from the EPA officially about this. So, and the last time I had a contact with our EPA contact was just, they basically just said to me, until you've heard, it isn't official. So we're not optimistic. Make no mistake, we're not optimistic, but we're not totally giving up on the idea either. And I looked at it this morning. So when I put this slide together a few days ago, there were 7,488 grants that have been terminated by this administration. And now we're over 7,600, okay? So that's just, they're just trying to do everything. And we'll see. A lot of these haven't settled out yet. I don't know what's going to happen exactly, but we'll see what happens there. Next slide, please. So that's just setting the scene for the environment, okay? What we're dealing with. A lot of construction going on. The political environment is very hurly-burly. Energy efficiency, which is a huge strength of ours, is just not as big of a deal in the United States as it is in many other countries. And, and so on. So those are the kinds of things that we're dealing with. So let's look at us specifically. Challenges facing our industry, the East industry. So we're still feeling the reputational effects of the 90s design installation issues. East manufacturers and distributors do not aggressively market East, and I want to preface that by saying as far as advertising and promotion is concerned relative to other industries, they do it, but they don't, it's not Nike, right? It's not like that. And regulatory bodies are posing real challenges. So even though we have New York that seems to have settled down, we had Minneapolis in the fall of '23. Who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? So that's just our reality. If you go to the next slide. And this is what I'm saying, we have some exceptions in our space. James Hardie being one of them, okay? And I've talked about James Hardie for years. So in 2023, they spent well over $83 million on advertising and promotion, okay? That's more than, much more than our entire industry put together, okay? I would venture to guess. So they're spending a lot on it. If you go to the next slide. We're also dealing with other industry groups that are much better resourced than ours. Softwood Lumber Board is a great example. Now, we work with them on some things. They're competitors of ours on others. But they have a checkoff program. They have an $18 million budget, $20 million budget year after year after year. It is a checkoff program. But those are the resources they're dealing with. And if you look at our tax return, we're about $1 million, okay? So there's a huge difference there that we're dealing with between them and us. And if you go to the next slide. And now the concrete folks have joined the band as far as checkoff programs is concerned. Because I used to know some people at NCMA when they were like a $5 million shop, then they merged with the concrete pavers, and then they now have a checkoff program in place. So they went from $5 million a few years ago. They're anticipating about $20 million now, okay, when they get the checkoff program all. So those are the issues that the EIFS industry is dealing with specifically, and they're challenges because we have to find a way. How can we break through smartly? How can we get our message through smartly, nimbly, and all of that? If you go to the next slide. And we have limited resources. We've got 3 employees. Okay, so this is our staff. Now, granted, we don't do everything. We have consultants. Bill Egan is one of our consultants. We have public affairs consultants. We've got other technical consultants to help us, but we're not a big shop, if you will. So that's what's going on with our challenges. What's in our favor? Well, Chip said it much better than I ever could just now. But I think for people who saw the awards program last night, that's where we are, okay? So, I mean, we represent a cladding system that literally has it all as far as aesthetics, performance, cost effectiveness, value, all of that. Today's EIFS, it's the best it's ever been. It's not even close. And I think we all see that. And it's fabulous. And, we can look like anything else. And somebody actually said something to me interesting. If we're facing an economic downturn, we actually can do pretty well relative to other cladding systems because if they're going to build anything, they're going to want to be cost effective about it, and that plays into our sweet spot really well. Go to the next slide. And I will say this till the cows come home. I don't care what's going on Pennsylvania Avenue right now. Sustainability is not going away, okay? It's just not. It may be paused for a little bit, but it's not going away. Even though it's not as big of an issue here in the U.S. as it is in other countries, it's still an issue. It's an important one. And if you go to the next slide, it's something that I ran into. I was at a strategic planning summit at the AIA a couple weeks ago. And it's amazing. You talk to all of the other groups that are there, sustainability, green building design. It's important to them. It's important to states like California. It's important to cities like San Francisco, LA, Washington, New York. So it's not going away, and it's something that we need to keep pretty much in the forefront of what we're doing. And then if you go back to the last one just a little bit. Thank you, sir. Housing affordability. That's going to be an issue, right? And for multifamily especially, you look at any RS means data, any building type, any city, we're going to do great. I mean, it's we subscribe to RS means regularly now, and I forget, a wall system newly built and installed, you compare us to stone. I mean, my gosh, it's 100% difference, right? I mean, we just really, really do extremely well. So that's going to be helpful to us. And if you go to the next slide. And retrofits. I mean, who else can do retrofits except for us? And you heard Kermit yesterday talk about retrofit construction, renovation construction being a bigger part of the mix than new construction, or a bigger part than it's been for a long time. And we can do really well there. And I think that plays into a sweet spot that we can take advantage of. Go to the next one. And our brand perception could be changing. I loved it. I found this yesterday. It came on my Google alert. Okay, I'm going to read it. Construction crews are removing the distressed brick facade and replacing it with eaves panels, a more cost-effective and energy-efficient alternative to brick. These new panels will provide better insulation and protection while maintaining a similar appearance. So this is in Arkansas. The Arkansas Department of Transportation is replacing a brick facade with eaves. I mean, that's great. And you have, for Arkansas, a mainstream news publication reporting it like this, and only being positive. This is great news for us. So I think brand perception is slowly changing, can be slowly changing, but that's great news for us. You go to the next one. So what can we do to support the industry? So we've got some challenges, we've got some real strengths. What else can we do? Go to the next slide, please. I said at the outset of these remarks that, we're not going here one year, there another. What we're doing is we're kind of taking a building approach, kind of a steady path, and building on the previous year. So these are actually the same paths that I mentioned last year. So help avoid industry disappointments, continue to participate fully in working groups, continue to encourage allies and prospective members to support EIMA and its programming, and consider enhancing financial support. So if you go to the next slide. This is from Kingfisher Strategies. We engaged them in 2023, and these are kind of the things that we said that he recommended, Shep Burr recommended that this industry take on doing. And I think, I'm not going to read any of them, but I think if you look at several of them and you look at the working group meetings that we had today and the speaker we just had with Dave Hutchinson, I think we're already exercising some of these right now. Okay, next slide, please. Working groups. I mean, those presentations by Bill Egan, by Raphael Bao, by Chip Bloom, and who else am I forgetting? I'm forgetting somebody. Sorry? Nate Katz. Sorry, Nate. But look what we're doing. We're doing a lot, and it's great, and we're keeping doing. And it's all integrated, it's all strategic, it's all working together, and it's all helping the common good. So that's great. Next slide, please. And we've got a great ecosystem. So look, these are groups that we regularly work with. These are groups that have supported us, or we support them. And I think one thing that's unique about EIMA is that, yes, we're a manufacturer-heavy association. That's true. But we've got associates, we've got distributors, we've got contractors, and we actually have allied organizations all working with us in what we're doing here to help move the needle for the eaves industry. And nothing was evidenced by that, by the working group meetings and who was there, who was participating. I was thrilled that Zach, you participated in our meeting yesterday. That was fabulous. Thank you for doing that. And we had others do the same, which was great. Next slide, please. And we also discovered we've got allies in D.C. with other trade associations. At this summit I went to, all of these groups that you see here, we all participated in AEC Strategic Planning Summit a couple of weeks ago. We all found and discovered that we had got some issues of common interest, with respect to sustainability, with respect to advancing our own agenda, with respect to getting our message heard by people that need to hear it. And so these are groups that we can work with now. We're pretty confident we can work with now, and that's great. Next slide, please. And consider enhancing financial support. I say this, these are audited tax return numbers that are on our Form 990, so that's why I'm mentioning them. I'm not mentioning stuff that isn't audited. So this is publicly available. Look what happened. So we've been skating around the $800,000, $900,000 level for years, and all of a sudden in 2023 we hit $1.3 million in revenues, which was great. Now we had some help with that. We're not as high in 2024. We benefited from an earned income or an employee retention tax credit that was a one-time thing, but we're over that $1 million mark, and we should be over that $1 million mark pretty much from now on. which is great. So we're making progress. Next one. And this is great. This is a positive. We now have 14 associate members at EIMA. And I think that's a high number. I don't have the history of it, but it's certainly the highest since I've been here. And we've got 2 new members, I would say, in the last month. And I'm gonna recognize them here. But we've got National Gypsum. So thank you, National Gypsum, for coming back. And BASF, which is great. So BASF, let's give them a hand. So, and all of these other groups. So there's a lot of momentum here, and you saw it in the networking lounge and the support for the industry, which is great. So there's, the momentum is building. The train is definitely leaving the station. And then the next slide. And that's really all I have to say. And I'm happy to take any questions or comments if anybody has anything. Happy to do that, but that's what I've got. I'm kind of hoping there are no questions, actually. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. And with that, I officially adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for supporting the industry. We have a lot of work to do, but we're on the right track. So again, have fun this afternoon, and we see you around.